Do you know absolutely nothing about coding? Excellent, because neither do I. But actually, no. Good if you know absolutely nothing. Today we're going to be running through a practical tutorial where I'm going to teach you everything from the ground up. No prerequisite experience required on how to build a website, how to code in HTML, learn some CSS, upload a website to the internet, get VS Code. We're going to cover everything. So sit tight, get a notebook out and follow along, and let's get into it. Here is a super quick demo of the site that we're going to be building today. So it's just going to be a little portfolio page where you can add some content about you, some experience, some projects, and if you click on a project you can come into here and you've got a nice boilerplate of all the code that you can run through, and you can just have some articles and stuff like that. So the first thing you're going to need to start your coding journey is a terminal, and basically everyone on planet Earth that is a normal human being uses VS Code. So you're going to want to start off by going to download VS Code in Google, and that's pretty straightforward. Definitely get that done. Step 1, check. Excellent. Step 2, what we're going to do for our website build today is open up our terminal. So if you just click up, this is the entry point, and we're going to go open. Come into our files. I'm going to look for a folder called something that I cannot seem to find. Tutorials. Noob, because that's what you are. And we're going to come into this empty directory in VS Code, and we're going to make a new file called index.html. Now that's basically how files work. Index is just a classic term if it's the primary file. If you wanted to make a CSS file, you'd go styles.css. If you wanted to make a JavaScript file, you'd go, I guess index.js, JavaScript. But for this tutorial, we're only going to need one index.html file. And so HTML is basically the language of the internet. Every coder knows it. And so to initialize a project in HTML and get like the basic boilerplate, you just type an exclamation mark, and because VS Code is clever, if you click enter, it will just give you the standard information that you need. Now, for your VS Code, there's two extensions I'd recommend. So if you come over here to extensions, you want to go and get Live Server. If you just click on Live Server and click install, that would be excellent. And the other one I would recommend is a page formatter. So if you just come into your VS Code and click on a Mac, it's Shift Option F, it will format it for you. And if you don't have a formatter installed, a box will come up here saying, do you want to install one? I'd totally recommend it. So now we have an index.html file set up on our computer. What do we do with it? We have Live Server. Well, what we can do is click Open with Live Server, and that is going to start up a page on your computer that, as you can see, is totally blank, which is what you'd expect because we have nothing in here. And that's just going to be where we do all of our coding in our index.html file. We're going to be templating this site with information that will show up, and then eventually when our website looks good, we'll host it on the internet and it will be the equivalent thing. So what I'm going to do is move that to the right side. I'm going to resize this window, and I'm going to close this because we're only going to need this file today, and we're going to start off by talking about HTML. So essentially HTML is made up of tags or containers or buckets, however you want to look at it, but each of these things is called a tag, and tags have attributes. For example, this one has the tag is called meta, the character set is called UFT8. These ones have no tags, but you'll also notice that every tag has a closing tag, so this head has a closing head tag, and that tags can have contents between them. So if I type James in here, James comes up on our website, and this James is contained within these two tags, so they're kind of like containers. This body, the start and body, contains this James text. this head tag contains these pieces of information. And so all tags, I mean, there's essentially like different types of tags, but basically you have information metadata tags. So your head, meta, title, this is all metadata, so it doesn't technically come up on the web page. It's just like background information. And then you have like positioning tags, so that's like body is a positioning tag. It's like a container. And then you have text tags, and so a text tag would be, for example, if you wanted a header, you'd type H1. Always remember to close your tag, and then between these two tags in here, you can write text. And then H1 stands for a header 1, which is the largest size header. And so that header is, yeah, I mean, it's a text tag contained within these container tags. Now, there's a lot of different tags, and they all, like for example, there's a lot of different container tags that contain information or content that goes on a page, but they're all essentially, they all do the same thing. They're just like named different things, like they have aliases just to make it easier to look at the information. So for example, in body, I would have a header tag. You know, you have a document, you have an introduction, you have a header. So I could, my closing tags auto-generate. I could write James in here. Actually, let's write introduction. Then, you know, standard practice would be to have a main, which is where you have the main content. So we'll have main content. And then underneath that, I'll have a footer at the bottom of the page, and I'll write footer. And we'll notice these things, I'll get rid of this. Actually, we'll keep that there for a second. Auto formatter. So we'll notice that all of this information came up on our page in standard order, and our body contains all of this contents. Our header only contains this content, so basically that's what the tab system is for. So these tabbed items are contained within this body tag. Now, as I mentioned before, you typically only have a head and a body, only one of them, whereas you can have, you know, you'd only have one main, one header, but your most common tag is going to be a div, so a division, and you can have lots of divisions, you can have lots of sections, you can have spans, you could have heaps of divs, you could have divs within divs, you could have spans within spans, and it's basically just like bucketing information depending on how you want it to be laid out on the page. So there's James times 2, and we have all of these kind of unnecessary wrappers around it. But so that's kind of like tags. Now, in terms of text tags, your main text tags for, you know, these are space tags. I'm going to get rid of them for a second. Your main text tags are, you know, you have H1 James. We can have an H5 James times 3. And you'll notice that that's a lot smaller than this first H1 tag. You can have paragraph tags, so that would be small. You can see that we have, so that's just a standard paragraph text. You can have a paragraph, and you can have a strong tag. So this is one way of bolding text, bold text. And you can see we get some bold text there. And so there's a lot of different tags that you can do, but the primary ones are going to be the ones that we use in this example. That's just a bit of an introduction. The main thing is that every tag needs a closing tag, otherwise your document will not be happy. So anyway, now that we've kind of addressed those things, what we're going to do is start off by generating a pretty standard HTML layout. So here we have our primary items, and I'm going to separate them. So we have our body document, we have our header, which has nothing. Maybe we just keep it with header. We have our main, which is like the juice of our document, and we have our footer. Now, when you design HTML documents, like standard practice is that you need it to be responsive. So basically, you don't want to have content falling off the edge of your page. And the best way to do that is to start by designing a mobile screen first. So that essentially means that you want to start off on a screen that's nice and small, because if it looks good on this size, it's easier to make it look good on a bigger screen than go from a bigger screen to a smaller screen. So in this example, if I just copy and paste that a bunch and save it, you'll see that our page naturally responds to this small size. But if I were to add a style, which we'll come to later, then we get this overflow of information, which doesn't necessarily look good on a mobile. We don't want to have our users scrolling if we don't have to make them scroll. So let's just get rid of that for a second. So currently we have these sections of information that look good. It's nicely formatted. And so you could have, like if we're making a website that's going to be a bit of a portfolio about you, something like a resume, you could have your introductory content here, you could have the body, your work experience and all that, and then you could have some links to your social media profiles down the bottom. So now that we've done that, just a great little tip to help you figure out how these containers kind of divide content is you can use what's called a border. And that essentially works by applying a style to a particular tag in your document. And that's where CSS, which is basically the styling for your HTML, comes in. So there's a couple of ways we can do that, but what we're going to do is up here, we're going to open up 2 style tags. And these style tags are going to be used to select content from this document, our body document, and make it look a certain way. So for example, if I didn't want to use these style tags, you can type what they call inline styles. So I would just say style color green, for example, and that's going to make my text go green. I can do blue, and then if I wanted to add another one, you have to make sure that you have this little semicolon at the end between them. I could do border, and this might be 2 pixels solid yellow, and now you can see that we have a border in here. And that's just, once again, a really good way to kind of visualize your containers that you've got. So if you were to have a div and you weren't sure what content it was containing, you could just give it a border and it will show you the bounds, the outer bounds of that. But the first thing we're actually going to do that most people will do in their documents is these documents will have like a base styling. And we just want to get rid of all base styling so that we start from scratch. And what we're going to do is use this little asterisk, which means select everything, and we're just going to apply a box sizing of border box, margins of 0, and padding of 0. Now you don't really have to understand what that means, but you can see that now our content fits directly to the width of our page, which is awesome, and it just gets rid of any original styling. So now that you know how you could style using inline styles, where you give the style attribute to a particular tag, we're going to learn how to use styles using a style tag. And so just imagine that everything in here is CSS. And how CSS works is you pick a particular tag and you say, okay, main, I want to give it a background of, let's say, pink. And so it's going to say main, okay, read main down here and give that element, that particular tag, a background of pink. We could say div, for example. We don't have any divs down there, but we could say I want divs to have a background of purple. And now if I came down here in main and wrote a div with James in it, it would have the background of purple. Now because the div is within the main, it overwrites the styling of the main and sits on top. And you can see that, for example, if I were to comment this out, and so we can comment by adding slash asterisk asterisk slash, that the background is indeed that color. But good to know, absolutely. And we can demonstrate this process further, because if I were to write another div down here with some random text, it also makes it purple. And so this div tag will select any div within this document and color the background purple. Now, there are other ways that you can select content, and one of them is using what they call an ID. So in here, you can give the attribute ID and say, okay, this ID, I want it to be main. And so now instead of having main here, I could select an ID, and you do that in CSS by using the hash, and you write the ID name. So actually, let's make it different. I'm going to call this one James, and I'm going to say this ID is called James. And I want all the text, so I want the color to be turquoise, for example. And it's going to select everything in James and make the color turquoise. So that's super cool. Obviously, it looks terrible, but you know, for the sake of learning, that's what you need to know. And so from here, you're kind of in a position where you can go ahead and just start styling out your entire page until it looks exactly what you want. And there are like a huge number of ways that you can style content. For example, you could go text align is equal to center. And that's going to center our text. And basically anything you want to do, you can just look up on the internet and there'll be a guide for it, but we're just going to cover the main things that you need to know to build a simple website today. So anyway, let's get rid of some of this random information that we've got and actually start styling out a proper website. So clear back to the basic boilerplate that we need. And we're going to start off by having a header. And in this header, what we're going to do is we're going to have your name. So my name is James MacArthur. That's going to come up there. And we're also going to have a home button. And so that has the tag of button. And we're just going to have home written in there. And so that's going to come up here. And you can see that shows up as a button that we can click on. Now, obviously, that doesn't do anything for the minute, and that's how we want it. Cool. So now we have our basic button and our little title. The next thing we're going to do is actually import some special things. So we're going to import some styles and some icons that we're going to be using, and they're just super useful little graphic design things in your document. So what we're going to do is come over here and go to Google Fonts. So Google provides you a whole lot of free fonts that aren't necessarily installed in your computer. And the one that we're going to use today is Poppins. So what you do is you just come in here with Poppins, select the styles that you want. So we're going to go with thin, extra thin, light, regular, medium, semi-bold, and bold. And we are going to, there's two ways you can import it. One is you could use this link tag, and if you have a link tag, you want to paste it up here in this head content where we have all the metadata, and then you can apply it to everything using this everything selector and say font family Poppins. And so if I just come back over here, you'll see that when I save this, it changes the fonts to Poppins, which is super dope. The other way you could do it is using a CSS import. So instead of importing it into the link up here, we can delete that. And we can import it into our style sheet here, and you'll see that the font style is retained. So it's up to you, whichever you prefer. Super cool. The other thing that we're just going to do is come over to a particular font awesome icons. And the link to this will be in the description below, but basically we're going to be using a free icon set that we will need to import a link for to show that we're actually going to use it. But that will also just be in the description, the link, so you can just copy it straight in. And so that will be this link just here that I'm about to copy into our document. And so yeah, once again, that will be all link tags go up here, so we just include that. And now what you can do is if you wanted an Instagram icon, you could just come over here, copy this icon tag with this class. We'll get to classes in a second. And if we just resize our document, we can come down here into our HTML, paste in that document, and you can see that we have that little Instagram icon, and it's inside our main, so the background is pink. So that's super dope. We've kind of learned a bit about styling with IDs and just using the tag. The last way you can style is with a class. So if I had class is equal to home button. Now you don't want spaces between them because a space represents, okay, this next item is a second class. So if we had home button and then up here the selector to target classes is a period or a full stop, we would type home button. And if we just open that up like this and say home button, we want border none. That gets rid of the border. And if we wanted a background of orange, let's go orange red, I think. You can see that that has applied this class to that button. And if we wanted to apply a second class, so let's just call one text, color white, we can apply a second class here by just adding that text class, and that makes our text go white. So those are just some cool little extra things that we can do. We're not necessarily going to stick with them, and so I'll just delete them for the minute, but it's good to know. So yeah, essentially now that we have our fonts and we have our icons, we can start using positioning styles and display styles. So for this, what we're going to want is to write some styles under here for our body. And we're going to have a display, and so you have a lot of different displays, but the main ones you're working with are flex and grid. And so flex just says, okay, I want to make it so that we have everything as boxes. And so now what it's done is it's lined up all our boxes next to each other and just given them a minimum amount of space that they need. So you can kind of actually select them here. There's one box, there's a second box, and there's a third box. For example, if you open up the body here, you can see that, okay, there's our main with our icon, and here's our header, and then that's that box, and so on and so forth. And so flex is great for display because what we can do is we can give it a flex direction. Currently its default is row, but we want column, and that's going to set everything back to how it was before. But now what we can do is we can use a style just by saying flex, different to display flex, where if we give the main a flex of 1, it's going to occupy as much of this body space as it possibly can. And so in this particular example, if I were to copy this down there and write James in here, it's going to try and occupy as much space as it can. And so essentially we have all this white space down here, and so it's obviously not doing that, and that's because we currently have our page, our HTML page is actually only as big as it needs to be. And so another thing you can do is come into here and you can apply widths to things. And so you can go width, for example, 20 pixels. So if I do that, it's going to look kind of funky. Try and make a maximum width of 20 pixels. But what we're going to do is set a minimum height. So it's going to be the minimum height, and we're going to go 100 view height. So view height is just a dimensional selector, space dimension. And so now that we have 100% view height as our total container size, this flex 1 means that it's like, okay, be greedy with the space. I want to take up as much as possible. For example, if I gave the header a flex of 1 also, it's kind of like a privilege. They both have the same privilege, so now they have to share that space, but the footer gets left out. And if I went to our footer and did the same, then it would also share that space. But that's not what we want. We just want the main to occupy a majority of the space, so that's super cool. We want our header to stay at the top, and we don't want our divs to be purple or our text to be turquoise. Cool. So the next thing we're going to do is just one last important thing, and that's position. So the default position is unset, but I guess it's technically relative. And if you apply positions to things, it just tells content where to space out relative to its parent container. For example, in this case, body would be referred to as the parent tag, the parent container, and these three tags would be referred to as children. And so if we apply a position of relative to our body tag, then like, for example, a position of relative to our main tag, it's just nothing's gonna change. It's just gonna say, okay, position this relative to its parent container. But there's different types of positioning. So for example, there's fixed, there's absolute, and there's sticky. And in this case, we're gonna do sticky. And we are going to apply that to our header. We're just gonna say position sticky, and we're going to say top of 0, and so that's going to position this header element, which I might actually just give a background of red for the minute just so we can see it. It's going to position it sticky to the top so that, you know, for example, if I were to really just make it obvious, let's just do something a bit excessive. See if I can make this whole page display. It's just going to keep this sticking to the top of the page by a distance of 0. Equally, I could come in here and write 100 pixels, and it would have it stick 100 pixels from the top. If I wrote fixed, for example, it's going to do a similar thing, except you'd have to give it like a width, for example, and say 100%, which is another way that you could style things. Width is relative to its parent container, so 100% would be 100% of the parent container. But in this case, we're just going to stick with sticky. And sticky is super nice just to have your header kind of stay with you, the relevant information, which is home, and all that good stuff. So let's scroll back up to the top and set that back to 0. So it sits there, excellent, and get rid of some of this stuff. The first thing we're going to do in our main section is put in a section. And we're going to give this section an ID of about me. And so obviously there's nothing there yet, but in this section, we're going to write some information about myself. So we're going to say, hi, my name is James, and I like to code. So that information comes up. We're going to come up here. We're going to apply this. We're going to give it a class of equal to also about me. The standard is applying styles using classes predominantly. So we're going to say about me using the bullet point selector and just say, well, actually, let's not say any, well, actually, yeah, sure. We're going to give it a margin of 0 and auto. So margins can be essentially like space outside of the container. So if you had a container and you're like, okay, I want to leave space on the outside of the container, you'd use a margin. If you have a container and you wanted to leave space on the inside, you would add a padding. So if margin currently doesn't do anything, if I set 100 pixels, so this first selector is vertical and this is horizontal, it would apply a vertical margin up here. Now padding is on the inside of the container, so if I did 100 pixels and 100 pixels, it applies 100 pixels on the inside, and so we now have like an inside cushioning to our container. And so once again, if you inspect this element using this little inspector tool, you can see that the green is the padding, the cushioning, and the red is the margin on the outside. So that's super cool. And so what we're going to do is we're actually not going to apply any padding, but we are going to set a max width of 800 pixels. And so essentially what that means is that this container that contains this text is only going to stretch to a maximum of 800 pixels. And outside of that, if we have extra width on the side, it's going to be automatically distributed either side. So that's space either side. And so when we come out here, you can see that our container is reaching this maximum width and it's automatically distributing space on the outside. So that's just a nice little feature to give yourself some space. and have all your content centered. The other thing we're going to do is come up to our header and once again apply a padding. And in this case, we're going to do 20 pixels top and bottom vertical, and we're going to do 10 pixels horizontally. And so that's just going to make it look a bit nicer. And actually, the other thing we're going to do is use flex again. So in this particular case, we're going to say display flex, just like before. And we're going to wrap this James MacArthur in an H1 tag. So I'm going to move that inside here. So it's nice and big. And we're just going to say header, actually let's just apply a class here. So class equals header text and say dot header text flex 1, so it occupies all the space, and text align center so that the text is centered in the middle of the page. And so that's super cool. We basically have our text centered and we have our little home button all nice and neat, which is very cute. Cool. So we're actually going to do one last thing just to make it slightly more complicated, but we're going to look at the last style of positioning, and that is absolute positioning. And we're going to apply that to our button here just by removing this text class and adding one in here that is .home button. And so we're going to give it a position of absolute. And so absolute basically takes it out of context of the page and just overlays it randomly. So it's like an overlay that is not dependent on the place of anything else. And so when it's like this, you have to make sure that you give it relative margins to, it's overlaid on the nearest parent relative container. So the nearest parent relative container is this body, and so it's going to be relative to that body. Well, actually, it's going to be relative to the sticky header here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give this a top of 50%, a left of 10 pixels, and we're going to translate, which is a transformation. So transform, translate, we're going to translate it Y, and we're going to move it back 50%. And what that's going to do is just center it perfectly within this the nearest relative container, which is the sticky one. And the translate Y pushes it down 50% of the height, but we have to move it back up by 50% of its height, because if we don't have this, it's just going to sit, so 50% is at the top, but we want it back up a little bit by half the width of the button. So that's super cool. And then the last thing we're going to do is go home button. And now what you can do is you can select tags within this particular, well, actually we don't need to do that. So we're just going to say border, none. It's going to get rid of its weird border. We're going to go, let's think about this for a second. Let's go color. The color's already black. We're going to go, well, actually, let's just get rid of this red. The red is terrible. So currently this background is gray. Actually, first we're going to come into here and we're going to use what they call a box shadow. So here you apply a horizontal and a vertical shadow direction. So we're going to say 0 horizontally and 5 pixels vertically. And then we do a spread and a blur. So I'm going to go 3 pixels for spread and blur. And I'm just going to say black. And that's going to apply a shadow. So obviously that's way too intense. So let's just make that 0. Still way too intense. So 6 pixels. And I'm going to go gray. Maybe even lighter, to be honest. So you can also do these kind of selectors. So let's try and AAA. That's still a bit lighter. 2. Let's go 8. And let's try making this 3 pixels. So you can kind of just have a fiddle with these sort of numbers. So maybe 2 pixels looks alright. Make this 1, honestly. So it's just a nice little bottom banner piece, I guess. And this home button, we're going to need to have a cursor pointer so that when you hover over it, it appears to be a button. And we're going to go background is transparent, so there's no background color. And the last thing we're going to do is give it a font size of, typically font sizes are done in what they call rem or M. It's just, you'll kind of get the hang of it, but I'm going to go with 2M, which is probably going to be massive, so maybe a 0.8 M, which is probably too small, so like 1.2. I'll just go with 1M, sure, pretty standard, nothing crazy. Excellent. For the header text, I'm just going to go font weight of 500, so that's kind of how bold everything appears. Maybe I'll go 600. And that comes from when we were importing all of these fonts, we were doing different font weights. But that looks reasonable. And the last thing I'm going to do is, honestly, maybe give this a text shadow. So text shadow is similar to a box shadow. And basically it just, like if I did green, it gives your text like a bit of a shadow in the background for whatever you might want to do. So I'm just going to go black, and I'm going to make this 1 pixel. So it just kind of adds a bit of a text effect, which can look kind of nice. Cool, so that's all done. The next thing we're going to learn about is hover effects. So what you can do is you can do home button, hover, and so if you hover over an element, these styles will be conditionally applied to when they're hovering. So I'm just going to go opacity, which is how transparent is, 0.7. And so what's going to happen is when we hover, you can see, like if I were to make it very transparent, it just makes it more transparent. And in here you can add transition, which is basically just saying, okay, so if these things happen, and we're going to go transition duration of 300 milliseconds. So now when we hover, it takes 300 milliseconds for that transition to apply, which is kind of nice. The last thing we're going to do is user select none, so that just means that the user cannot select that text like they could this. Cool, so that's kind of our header done. We have our little home button. We should actually make it do something, and so what we're going to do is actually change this to an A tag. So an A tag is an anchor tag for linking and routing. And in this case, it's more relevant because we want to link and route our users back home whenever they click it. And so what you do is you add an href, and so that's just the reference. And we're just going to say slash index.html, and so that's just going to route them back to the home page. And so up here, what you'll have to do is just come up and add text decoration none, so that will remove the underline, and we'll just have to go color. Once again, back to black. And that will remove. A tags come with some standard text, but now if you click that, that's going to continue to route you back home. So that's kind of that. Now we are also just going to come down to our footer and actually do some quick styling there. So if we just select the footer by this, and we're going to use the second kind of display, which is grid. Grids are good for making grids, but flex is good too. You kind of just figure out which one you prefer. But there's two standard ways to center content. So using grid, what you do is place items center. And what that does is it's just going to put anything in the center of that box. And so you can see the border of this box, because if I give it a border of 2px solid green, that box is there. So it's placed it smack bang in the middle. Now obviously that looks terrible, so I'm going to add some padding of 10 pixels, maybe 6 pixels vertically and 0 horizontally. Maybe we could go 10. And then if I just comment out that line, that's just going to sit nicely in the middle. And we're going to go footer, and select any icons, tags within the footer, is what that syntax means, and just go cursor pointer, so that when you come over it, there's a pointer cursor. We're going to go transition duration, same as before, 300 milliseconds. And this time when people hover over it, so we're going to go footer icon hover, we're going to go color, pick a pretty color, so I'm going to go turquoise. And so what that's going to mean is that whenever people hover over it, it just has a pretty little icon color. I'm also just going to increase the size of it, and so icons work like things, and I'm going to go 1.2 rem. Maybe I could go 2 rem, to be honest. It's too big. 1.5, sure. Cool, so now we have a nice little icon. You could even do LinkedIn, perhaps more relevant for a lot of people. LinkedIn, just like that. And what you could do is actually come down here and make what they call an unordered list, and have a list item is a good way to display this kind of content in terms of just making sure it's clear. And in this first list item, I could have that, and in the second list item, I could have that. So those are my two list items within my unordered list. And if I come back over the page, normally lists would display with bullet points. So what you have to do is come up to your footer and just say, okay, footer, select the unordered list within the footer and say list style none. So that's going to remove the bullet point. And what we actually want to do is have a display in here. We're going to do flex. So flex, remember, will display things horizontally, and we're going to give it a gap, which is maybe 4 pixels, which just, actually let's go with like 1 EM, which is the standard size. It's just going to sit between your flex children, the content within your flex container. So now we have our two little icons, which looks nice. The last thing we're going to do is actually get rid of these, because now what we can do is here we can just give this a margin of 0 vertically and auto horizontally, which didn't work because that unordered list is actually what's taking up all the space. So if we were to apply width, or say max width fit content, then it would mean that the width of the thing is not the entire space, it's only the width of whatever is inside it. So that is probably just we can honestly even apply the padding up here, and then we just have one less thing we have to worry about. Cool, so that looks reasonable. The next thing we're going to do is, so that's our footer done. Now all we really have is our main content. And here we're going to have an About Me section, and I'm just going to make another one. This one is going to have, has to be a lowercase n section. There's too many of them. This one is going to be ID equals education. And then we're going to have one last one, a section, and we're going to give it an ID is equal to projects. So one last thing we want to do just here is use anchor tags once again for these links, these icons, and we're going to give them an href of equal to whatever. I'm just going to use a hash for now because I don't have a link. Well, actually, maybe I just get mine. Let's say, for example, LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is this. So I would just copy in my link here. And what you want to do is add target, an attribute called target underscore blank, which is just going to ensure that when we click on that link, it opens up in a new page. I'm going to do the same for this one, except I'm just going to give it an href of a dud for the minute, so nothing there. But now if I come down here and click on this LinkedIn tag, it's just going to redirect me to my LinkedIn and not lose this page. But we just want to make sure that when we're down here, our footer, any anchor tags have color black. So that just means that they're not going to have that random color, the blue color that links often do have. Cool. So now that we are back here, we're going to start having these sections. So we've got all these different sections here. First one is done. I'm going to come up here to wherever we set that padding, which I can't seem to find. About me margin. So maybe we just want 40 pixels. Not so big, it can sit a bit higher on the page. There, that's pretty good. If I close that, it should still sit nice and centered. And maybe we actually just want to center this text. So I'm going to give this a display of flex. Another way you can center content is by going justify content center and align item center. That would just make sure that everything is smack bang in the middle of the page, in the middle of that box container. So that's in the middle. You could also have an image of you if you wanted. So for example, if I just went, if you go to your LinkedIn page and right click on that image and click open a new tab, you should be able to reference that particular image. So here, I'm going to add this in an H2 because it's probably better to follow formats. You can just have text that's not in a text tag specifically, but it's good to, I'm going to make that an H3 even. Actually, I'm going to go with a paragraph tag. Paragraph tag, and I'm going to have an image. I'm going to actually use a div, so division, and in here I'm going to have an image. So an image has to have a source, and the source is equal to the link, the internet link that you want to use. So this is going to be the internet link that I use, and they also have an alt tag, which is just like a subtitle that no one sees. So pic of me, and another way that you can close the tag is by just closing that one tag instead of actually having the closing tag like the rest of these do. Is just by, you could close this without needing that second one like that. And so image tags typically work that way. And what I'm going to do here is set this on top, and since this about me section is displayed flex and flex center, the standard is row, so it's sitting in a row, and if I go flex direction column, it sits in a column like this. And what we can do is go dot about me image, target the image within about me, and just say width is equal to 100% of the parent container. All right, so now we get to the actually exciting parts. So we've just shown how to render an image, but we're actually not going to worry about an image here. What we're going to do is for each section, we're going to have an about me section, an education section, and a project section. We're going to come over to Font Awesome Icons, and we're going to look up some cool icons. So for education, we're going to get the medal icon. For the About Me page, we're going to pick probably, which one looks good? The User Ninja. And for the projects, actually I prefer the astronaut. Let's go for the astronaut. Let's see what they have for projects. I reckon probably this one. We're going to go with the projects, and we're going to wrap that in a div. We're going to do the same thing for all of them. So we start off our sections with a div that contains the icon. And so if we come back to our page, we refresh it and we can see that we have our icons here, which is super cool. So if we come up to our sections, these weren't there. Okay, so we refresh all of that. So our About Me part has some stylings, but actually what we're going to do is we're going to style all the sections the same. So we're going to change this to steal these two. We're going to write section, so that's going to target all of our sections, and that should bring them all into the middle. And then if we just remove some of these stylings just for the second, they should all line up nice and neat, so that's super cool. And for our section, our icons within our sections, we're going to go font size of 4 rem. Let's see how big that makes them. It's possibly a little bit large. Maybe I'll go 2.5. Cool, I think that's kind of nice. And what we're going to do is, it's going to look absolutely excellent. But next to each of these icons, we're going to have an H1 tag that says the section name. So it's going to be, well, actually, let's make it an H2, because the H1 should be reserved for the top header. So it's going to be H2 and H2. This one is education. Well, actually, let's call this experience. And then here we have projects. Cool. So that, I forgot, I need to wrap it in an H2 tag. Projects. Cool. Just going to enter these down to a new line. Just like that, and get rid of some of these extra spaces. So it should ever so slightly start to look like, now this for some reason has put it within the icon, but we actually want it after the icon. So just like that. And then I'll put that back up there. So those are all consistent, that's super cool. And what we're going to do is give each of these the same class. It's going to be section header. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it to all 3 of them. And then up here where I have section header, which I don't yet have, but I can just go dot section header, target the class with a period. I can go text align center, which is going to center everything, and I'm actually just going to go display flex, which is going to position them side by side. So now that our text align is gone, so instead what I'm going to do is go display flex, justify content center. So I'm just going to center everything using flex and align item center. So basically justify content positions it like horizontally centered depending on the orientation of your flex columns or rows, and align items positions it's centered in the other axis, so either X or Y. But now we have something that looks a bit like this, which I think looks pretty cool. And so the last thing I'm going to do is, because these are going to both be flex items, I'm just going to go gap of, let's go 20 pixels. Should spread them out a bit more. I'm actually going to make it a bit more. Let's go 100 pixels. It's too much. Maybe 60. Probably still a bit. Okay, 40 it is. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Cool, so now we have each of these header sections. What we can do is start adding some text underneath. The other thing I'm just going to do is I'm going to go after here, border, we're going to go, so you can either do a border all around, but we're going to do border bottom. I'm going to do 1 pixel solid gray. And so that's just going to put a border underneath each section header, and I'm also going to go padding bottom. You can target them specifically of maybe like 10 pixels. So that's just going to put some space underneath each of them. And we're just going to have these horizontal lines that I might actually just make slightly more opaque, no, slightly less opaque. So if I go AAA for hex codes, that's still a bit dark. Maybe if I go CCC, makes them a bit lighter. Cool. So now we have these little section headers where we can add some content about ourselves. So to come back into here, after this I'm just going to add another div, and I'm going to do that for each of them, but first we're just going to do this first one. So about me, I am a self-taught software developer with a background in civil engineering, and I enjoy teaching and creating. Should probably capitalize these headers. So that's just going to put some content in here. What I'm going to do also is just go class is equal to section content. We can probably style that right now, to be honest. So section content, I can have it just in here. Content. Remember, we're trying to style for the mobile, so let's just bring it in nice and small and see how it looks. So it's still nice and responsive, which is great. What we're actually going to do is, in the section, we're just going to give it a padding of 10 pixels. Should just bring it in a little bit, give it a bit more space around the outside for each of the sections. And we're going to come back to the content. We're going to go font weight light. Nope, maybe 200. Makes it a bit thinner. Let's go maybe 300. And I'm just going to go font size 0.9 em. A bit smaller. And maybe a padding vertical of 20 pixels and horizontal 0. So it's just going to put a bit of space in there. You could add however much you want in that particular section. For experience, I'm going to do the same thing, except instead of, remember how I mentioned that all tags, container tags are similar? So UL, an unordered list, is a similar version, except it has some pre-defined styles. But anyway, in this one, I'm going to have an unordered list, so you can see that that will come in with a bullet point, which is just off to the side, which is kind of annoying, but what we're going to do is bring that in just a second. So, you know, we could just add civil engineering experience, add another list item, graduated from this school, university, with this qualification, list achieved these great things during my education. So that should give us 3 little list items. And now what we're going to do is come up here, and the selector I'm going to use for that, we actually have to just add in the same thing. Class is equal to section content, so it's consistent with the one above. And we are going to, there are our bullet points. So once again, keeping it nice and small, we're just going to come up here and go target the education section with the ID targeted, which is the hash, and select the unordered list within that, and just say, okay, so I want to have, actually even better, we can just change this to a margin. Did that do anything? If I just comment that out, nope, that didn't do what I wanted it to do, so I'm going to change that back to a padding, keep it as the padding, and for the unordered list, we're going to say max width fit content. We're going to go margin of 0 auto. And that should just center this list. It's going to make it the width of the widest item, and it's just going to center that width either side. Center that list either side, so you can put in whatever you want here, all that kind of good information. And the last section, I almost feel like making the section headers bigger. Section header, what I can actually just do is section header, how big is it currently? Maybe I won't do that. I think that's all good. What I am actually going to do is just come up to the header real quick, and I'm going to give it a background of HSL. Hue saturation or lightness is another way you can do styles. I'm going to go 230 on the color spectrum. I'm going to go 70% saturation but 10% light, so that should be a pretty dark color. And I'm actually going to make color white. So now our header is just a little bit different, but I also have to change our home button, which is going to be here. So color, that's also going to be white. But actually, even better, what we could do is go background white, color black. For a bit of fun, and then we just have this, oh, that's not a good hover color. Background white. Why is that? Oh, it's changing the opacity, so it's becoming a lot darker. What do we want to do about that? Well, actually, so what we're going to do instead for this hover is we're just going to go background the same color up here. And we're going to go color white. So what's going to happen now is when you hover, it's going to swap over, which is kind of fun. But we're also just going to add in some padding of vertically maybe 4 pixels, and horizontally I'm going to go 10 pixels. Just going to make that button a bit bigger. Nice. Cool, so we have a little, we're just going to change this text shadow, box shadow. That's probably not too bad, although I could probably make it a blacker color, if not black. It's a nice little shadow, cool. And the text shadow is just going to be white now. So that should just give that a little bit of a glow. You can't see it, but if I made that like 10 pixels, you'd probably see it. There you go. But we're just going to keep it at 2, I think. Just so it's nice and bright. Home, cool. And then we continue coming down for projects. So this is probably the most exciting part. We can get rid of that about me. But what we're going to do is just put in a, come in here. So we're going to target projects, and we're going to make projects a display of flex, and we're going to go flex wrap. We're going to set that to wrap, and so what that's going to mean is that if our content ends up to the end of the row, it's going to go into the next row. we're going to go a gap of 10 pixels. We're going to go justify content center and align items center. And so you can't see that right now, but I'm also just going to go width full. Oh, sorry, that's 100%. It doesn't exist. Why is that not going the full width? Ah, that's what it is. Essentially, our section header needs to have a width of 100%. That will make that line extend all the way out so they're all consistent. We can get rid of that. Projects just there. Okay, cool. And so inside projects, we're going to make, that's the header. We're going to come down and we're going to go div, and we're going to give this a class of project card. And essentially what we're going to do is make these little black cards with white text that have, you know, all of our projects and some basic information. And so they're going to have, start off with an maybe 3 tag, and this is going to be project title. And then under here we're going to have a div, and the div is going to have some content, so it might have like, you know, a description. So I might just make that a paragraph. Oh, that's an O. Let's make that a paragraph. This project does the following things, and I made it because I thought it was really cool and would fix the world's problems. Cool, so that's our first little project title. Now, the last thing we're going to have is, so we actually don't need this div for the second, but what we do need is a div down here for the last thing, where I think we're going to have, we're actually going to change this to another unordered list. No, let's keep it as a div. And we're going to give this one a class of technologies. So this is going to be the technologies used in your projects or whatever. And I mean, you could just actually do an unordered list here. I don't know if it'll make it centered automatically like that. No, it shouldn't. So for this stuff is also going to need to have the section content header, so that's just going to change the text size so it's consistent. And in here, let's just say this list item is like HTML, copy that down, CSS, JavaScript, just says, no, we'll keep it as JavaScript. Oop. Let's just say Python. Those are all your skills, and then basically what we're going to do is we're going to copy this project card, and let's say we have 3 different projects. They're all going to show up down here, and obviously currently this looks terrible. I mean, our site looks kind of cool, nice little home, but you'll see what we're doing with the projects in a second. So if we come up here, and let's just remember that project card, and go dot project card, we're going to set a width of 600 pixels and a max width of 100 view width, which is the maximum width of the screen. So that means that they're going to be, 600 is way too wide, let's say 300. So you can kind of see how this works at the minute. They're just spreading out, they're centering. So I think we're going to have to change a couple of things, but you can see how on this min width they all center down, which is kind of nice. We're also going to go background, and we're going to match the color above, and we're going to go color white. So they're all going to be the opposite. We're going to go padding, which is 10 pixels everywhere. So they're nice and centered. Actually, we could probably do 20 pixels horizontally. Make the max width 400. Just give it a bit more space. So these are our little project cards, and then, yeah, once again, if you go onto a bigger screen, they should spread out, but they don't, and the reason is because we set this section to a max width of 800 pixels, which we actually don't want. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to target projects and say max width unset, and we're going to give it an important which overwrites everything else. And so for this particular section, it will unset that style, and it will let your projects just be as wide as possible. But we are going to want your projects to have a margin top of maybe 40 pixels. $100? Nope, that's doing the wrong thing. Oh, that's actually adding it to the... No, we don't want that there. We actually want it above our project cards. So since our project cards are just coming straight out, they're within section content. So what I'd probably want to do is add a bit of a... how do I want to do this? Project cards. I know what I want to do. So if we come up to section header, we can just say padding bottom and set that to like 40 pixels. Make it a bit bigger. Just means, no, that's way too large. And we want that to actually just be margin bottom. And we will set the padding bottom back to 10 pixels. So just like that. So now we've got a bit of space underneath each of them. That's probably realistically too much, so I might just set that to 20. Just like that. Cool. So now we've got a bit of space underneath each of them, and we've got our projects. So that's looking good. We've got our project cards. Remember we did an H2 down here. So project title H3, sorry. Project title H3. So we're going to go dot project card H3. And we're also just going to copy the syntax and do it for the paragraph. So remember, we're targeting only H3s within a project card. And so this one is going to be text align center. So that's just going to give our project title in the middle. We're going to go border bottom 1 pixel solid white. Just going to give it a little funky underline. And maybe a margin bottom of 4 pixels. Put a bit of space underneath them. No, actually I won't do that. And for the project card, what I'm going to do, the paragraph, I'm going to go margin top 4 pixels, maybe 8 pixels. Put a bit of space in there. I'm going to go font weight 100, maybe 200. Yeah, that's pretty good. I want text justify. Oh, sorry, text align justify. So it's going to justify the text, make it fit nicely. And under that, that's probably not too bad, really. I'm going to just make our projects gap 20 pixels, give it a bit more space, each of them. And the last thing I want to do is the list. So we're going to have .project card unordered list. So once again, I'm going to go display flex. So that's going to space them horizontally. Obviously that looks terrible. I'm going to go list style none. That's going to get rid of the pointers. I'm going to go HTML CSS JavaScript Python. I'm going to go justify content space between. So that's going to space them all out evenly. And I'm going to go flex wrap so that if the cards get small, they will all come down nicely onto a mobile view. I'm going to that's probably not too bad, really. Flex wrap. The last thing I'm going to do is, no, that's probably pretty good. Could probably even make them bolder and smaller. So I'm going to go font weight 600. I'm going to go font size 0.7 em. Just so there are, no, actually I don't like that. Let's just forget that ever happened. Cool, so that looks pretty decent. We've got our little icons, and the last thing we're going to do is to our project card go cursor pointer, so that when you hover over them you can click them. And we're going to add a transition duration, once again, of 300 milliseconds, because we're going to add a hover effect. So .project card hover, we're going to go transform scale 1.05, so that when we hover over it, we're just going to get that neat little hovering effect. Which is super cool. So that's looking pretty decent. Now, the last thing we're going to do is switch each of these project cards for an anchor tag. And you'll see why in a second. Anchor tag. So that's not really going to change anything, but what it means is that we're going to add an href is equal to, and this is where we're actually going to make a new file. So we're going to make a new file and call it project1.html. I'm going to exclamation mark that. And in here, oh, that's not good. So we saved that. We just need to come up here, project card, and just go text decoration none. Removes all that text decoration. The whole thing still works nicely though. I feel like we just need to go padding bottom. Oop, that's not bottom. 10 pixels. Make them a bit large. There you go, that's a bit nicer. Okay, so basically what it means is that if we go to our project, our href, and say /project1.html, if we click on this first link, it's going to redirect us to this new page where currently we have nothing, so we're just going to have James. And you know, you can go back to the main page, and so that's kind of how you route between pages. And so in here, we're just going to insert a super basic template for a project, and we're just going to have all of them route to, so I may as well just make project 2.html and project 3.html. So obviously your name is whatever you want. We'll do the little exclamation trick, save that, little exclamation trick, save that, and here we just want to add these hrefs /project2. This one is href /project3. And obviously in each of them you can do the exact same thing as before, but if we just, so the one thing we're going to want to have across all of them is these styles. So you're going to want to just copy this template into each of them. So open up a style tag, copy that basic content, and I'm just going to copy that and put it in here, and put it in here. And if you change the, you can change, so whatever you put in the title is what's going to appear at the top of the document. So I might actually just put this as Dev James, Developer James. You can see that switches up there. Now, we're going to want to keep our header component, so we're going to copy the header into each of them. So now if I click on a project, we'll get a header. Obviously it has no styling, so we're going to have to copy the header styles as well. So that's just going to be here. We're actually going to want everything here. So header, body, all that good stuff. We already have body, so we can just overwrite that. Overwrite that, and overwrite that. So now if I click on here, I'll get to keep my excellent header, and if I click home, it brings me back home, which is just what we want. And then the last thing we're going to, I mean, this is optional, but you could also copy the footer across if you wanted to, but I'm not going to stress about it. But in here, what we're going to do is for each of these pages, we're just going to have a main, and this is going to have a class of prose. And in here, I'm just going to go .prose max width 800 pixels, and I'm going to go padding. Let's go 20 pixels vertically and 8 pixels horizontally. And I'm going to go text align justify. Cool. And so what you'd do is you would just have, so h1 tag project 1, and under that what I'm going to do is insert a horizontal line with this special little tag, and that is not showing up for some reason. It's position relative. I'm in the wrong one. Okay, so this is project 2. So we click on project 2, we can see it shows up there. For the project 2, I'm just going to go .prose h1 text align center. So the header is going to be, no, actually I prefer the side. So we're going to just remove that. Got a nice little underline under the title. For the h1, I'm just going to, actually I'm going to make that an h2. Just to be sure, a bit smaller. Nice, perfect actually. And then in here, so we don't even need that, you could just go, okay, I mean honestly you'd just go paragraph tag, and I would just write this is paragraph 1, this is paragraph 2, and you could probably just say, okay, .prose p tags, we just want them to all have a margin of 0 and maybe actually 10 pixels vertically and 0 pixels horizontally. So that's just going to spread them out vertically a bit, and maybe just make the font size 0.9 EM. Just so it's a bit smaller, and you could just fill out this whole page with, you know, what this project is about, all that information, and you can just navigate between all of them. And so that was pretty much how you would style individual pages. And with that, we're probably just about done with everything you might need on our little website. And so the last and most exciting part is actually just to host it. So we're going to go to a place called Netlify, and you'll want to register an account. Super simple. Once you log in, you'll come to this page, and we just want to go add new site and deploy manually. So what we'll have to do is just go up one. So tutorials, new, drag and drop the folder. That's going to upload the folder. And it's currently deploying. It says that it's published. We have a domain. And with that, your site is literally live. Anyone can access it. The one other style that I'd recommend you add just before we do anything is in here where you have your pros. You just want a margin 0 auto, and what that's going to do is just make sure that when you come onto these sub pages, so we're actually just going to go with pros, 800 pixels. That's just going to mean that your content is centered in the middle of the page and you have your little article there. But that is literally a link that you could send to other people. If you want to know how to change the domain name to a custom URL for your own website, I have a video, link is also in the description. But that is literally your live website. You have gone from knowing nothing to coding your own portfolio with working links and routing and everything, and it looks pretty cool too. If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll make just about anything you want me to make, and I hope that you learned something. Come back for more. Catch you later.